we have to talk about a few things. But first, I want to know from you folks, who of you is a developer? Who of you is asleep? Who of you is a manager? But you're still developers. That's good. Who of you is purely into security? Good. If that was the case, this is not your talk. This is for developers. Because we need to talk about a few things. First of all, this word. DevSecOps. Honest question for y'all. Who likes this word? One person. Two. I appreciate that. Three. I tend to like it now, but first I didn't because, damn, this feels like a buzzword. I mean, having this in between machine learning and blockchain, and I have my full buzzword bingo card ready. That's how it felt to me. But if you look at DevSecOps, what we're going to talk about, let's narrow it down to that first, like the white part, DevOps. Who of you practices DevOps? I see some people are like, I don't know. Who of you thinks we're kind of DevOps-y? All right. Well, think about this. Core thing of DevOps is tearing the wall down between the old-fashioned developer organization and the operations folks, right? Or some people used it to get rid of a few folks, but that's not the intention of DevOps. The intention is that we have a team, and both developers and operations are represented in that team. That means that if I'm creating it on my machine, at the end of the day, I cannot throw it over the wall again and say, works on my machine, good luck with it, guys. No, I have to eat my own dog food. Basically, if you feel like if I create something and it goes into production and it goes wrong, I am responsible for it, then you're in that DevOps mindset. So if you think we're doing that to some extent, you're doing DevOps. You're all certified now. However, security is not in that mindset for most developers because security is still something far, far away. I'm building things that work, ship it. And think about it. Most of the things that we do are based on creating new functions. Look at your Scrum board, Kanban board, whatever sticky note boards you have, or digitally, Jira. I hate it. Sorry for Atlassian folks. But if you look at that, most of the things I described, like as a user, if I click on this, I wanted to do that, purely from a feature perspective. Nowadays, we think about things like scalability and maintainability because we are in the cloud. But security is not yet there, and we need to do that. Security needs to be in that same line as maintainability and scalability because it is our problem now. This is me. This is the most boring slide I have. Awful COVID beard. I'm a developer advocate. That means I develop sometimes and I send a lot of emails. I work for a company called Sneak. It is actually an abbreviation, so now you know. And I'm a Java champion, do something in the community, blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah, because we need to talk about problems. That's why I'm here for. So what are the problems we're trying to solve with that DevSecOps buzzword? Well, think about it. I will take you on my personal journey. That was 17, 18 years ago when I started as a very junior Java developer. I worked for a government agency in the Netherlands. I'm based an hour south of Amsterdam. And the thing was, we deployed 3 times a year. That's amazing. That means I have a lot of time to test all the crap I created before it goes into production. I can literally throw it over the wall like, your problem, good luck. However, if we look at nowadays, and before I joined Sneak, I worked for a company that deployed the service that we created 3 times a day instead of 3 times a year. That is a whole different perspective because now full pen testing is not possible anymore. That means we need to be aware of that. I mean, we're speeding things up. That means it comes with a risk. And the point what I'm trying to say is that security is a risk we now need to mitigate. Unfortunately, maybe. But if I don't do it, it might get 3 times a day into production and my security team finds afterwards. And that's not what we want. We need to be more aware of it and take that security mindset to develop in a secure way from the get-go. Because, face it, security is still a siloed thing in many companies. We have dev, we have ops, we tear down that wall, we're now DevOps, we get rid of a few people, amazing. But security is still there at the end. After 3 weeks of, my sprint is 3 weeks, and then the security dude comes up to me and is like, hey Brian, No, we found an issue. I'm like, oh my God, again? And I can handle that once or twice, but if it happens 3 or 4 or 5 times or every sprint, I need to match my KPIs. So we get friction in that team. And face it, security team is one team, and it probably scales by a single person. But development teams pop up like mushrooms. 1 development team, 2 development team, and still 1 security team. Have to rule them all. That is not a scalable position. So we need to take care of this. Because in the end, we don't want our customer data to be compromised. Right? Anyway, let's get into how bad is that situation. Well, I can name a few. But let's get into Java. Let's use another word, but buzzword. Cloud native application security. Ooh. So say if we think about security and think about creating code or creating an application, we think about our code that we probably put on a Git repository, either GitHub, GitLab, I don't care where it is, but our own code. However, that code is only 10 to 20% of what we actually put into production. However, that code is super important because that makes the difference between whatever I do and whatever my Spring Boot standard initializer does. Like we create that business logic that makes a difference for our customer and maybe gives us a competitive advantage. But say I created that Spring Boot application, and this is the first controller I created. Pretty awesome, works, ship it, right? Not quite. Who of you does code reviews? Okay, the rest does pair programming, I assume. Thank you. So then you find you do code reviews. What is wrong with this code? What kind of security problem did I just create? Sorry? Scream. Injection. Well, actually, it's cross-site scripting, but it's an injection, absolutely, because the parameter that comes in, without doing any validation or sanitization, I put it back into the response writer. So if I do this, it creates an alert. Well, that alert is not really interesting, but it executes code. So if I can use JavaScript, I might be able to go into your session ID, steal it, depending on how you configured it. At least I give some open ends to an attacker to do something. This is not what we want. And of course, you can use cross-site scripting like this, but there are many other ways to use cross-site scripting. Scripts, mouse overs, image source, and that. So we might have found this with good code reviews. But think about it, how do you do code reviews? I worked at a company that said like, we've got half an hour before the demo. Like every sprint ends with a demo at our company back in the day. Let's hack the last few things in. I give it to my junior. Please review it so we can ship it right away. And then we tick that box of at least 2 people saw it. So we're fine. No. You only get back like, I have no clue what it does, but probably that curly brace is on the wrong line because it doesn't meet our code standards. And in many cases, code reviews happen to be like that. And maybe on functionality as well, but not so much on security issues, and we should. However, it would be way nicer if we can catch this while we're programming, right? So I have an application over here, and you need to help me. So I can, let me log in. Of course, it's admin, because, hey, I work at a security company. No, don't save this. Change your password, yes, I know. Anyway, I showed you this one. Basically, this is what happens. So if I put in the parameter, and I will enlarge it for you. Yes, there. I put something in like script alert 1. It gets that alert. And, well, we might have found that with a review. There are other things in here. So what do you think of this one? This already gives you a hint. Yes, exactly, I heard already, SQL injection. So maybe I can do something like this. Close the SQL query, and then start a new one. And update every last name to, it doesn't give me anything back, but hey, now everybody names evil. And if I can do the same with your password or your username, it's quite interesting. So these are easy ones. These are the OWASP top 10 kind of things, right? But I'm using IntelliJ here, and I'm just giving you an example while like we should catch this at the beginning of our cycle. So what I did, I scanned my application for vulnerabilities. And yes, I'm using my own tool here, but there are multiple tools available. But you should be using this in your development lifecycle, either in your IDE or somewhere else. Because what I did over here is, if you can see this, it says, hey, you've got that SQL injection. And it starts at the user controller at line 60, which is here. And it ends at your search repository. So there's actually a path. Ooh, interesting. And what you see over here, indeed, is the parameter gets concatenated to the query. So good practices, if I use this way of accessing a database, is to use a prepared statement, because that's a two-step process, and the prepared statements make sure that the query is already sent to the database, and in the second attempt, the parameter is sent. In the first attempt, the DBMS, or the database management system, already takes care of the execution plan. So if in the second step I put the parameter in, SQL injection is virtually impossible. That's what a prepared statement does. Either way, I could also use the CRUD repository from Spring, in this case, because it's a Spring Boot application, and that take care of it as well, but that does it on the client side and sends a sanitized query over. So that can still technically be intercepted, but still much safer than I did over here. But we found this. We could do we found many other things, but this one is interesting. This one I didn't find until I created this application. So it says I have a path traversal, and it starts from line 31 to line 69. And let's look at this code. It is a file upload. Let me enlarge this, this is way better. All right, it's a file upload, and this multi-part file that I have here is going to be saved in these two lines. And it takes the upload folder and then this one over here, file.getOriginalFilename. But think about it. The multi-part file is just a Java representation of that post request I send in. So if I'm able to alter that post request and manipulate the metadata such a bit that my username or my getOriginal name is something like /// some important file.io, whatever it is, I might be able to override things on the machine depending on what the user privileges are. This is something I didn't think of as a developer. So these tools already might help me. And even it might not help you as a senior developer. We all know this, we never do this, but you might have junior developers in your team now or in the future. I'm not sure how education is nowadays, but I didn't have this at university or school or whatever. And specifically, if you're self-taught, you might not run into these things until you're actually doing applications for enterprises and people try to hack you. And then you're like, never thought that this could happen. So if I catch this already when I'm developing, that's a big plus. So we should do that. Let's get back to this one. So we talked about our code, right? But that's what is facing the surface. That is what is visible. However, the first thing we have under the surface is open source. Well, basically everything that we import. Who uses a framework, and I don't care if it's Spring, Quarkus, Apache Struts, or whatever, who uses a framework or a library in their application? That's almost everybody. Or the other folks are not doing Java, or they're like, I am pure Java. Good for you, amazing. Less stuff you put in, the less vulnerabilities you depend on, you implicitly get in, because that's the point. You probably heard of this, 2017. Long time ago, let me get straight to that. It was a problem for a company called Equifax, based in Atlanta, Georgia. What they had, they built their Apache, or they built their application on top of Apache Struts 2 that was vulnerable. At a certain point in time, somebody found out, hacked into it, snooped around, and 140 million customers were compromised. Well, the thing was, this was already found and fixed in March 2017. However, the hack was in May. Oops. Then they didn't find out, so after 76 days, we found out and we patched it. That's 76 plus that 2 months too late, in my opinion. And it cost them $2.0 billion. But let's get into the hack. So I have an application of, not in this one, application here. Doop. And let's get this one already over here. Cool. I have an application here, and this runs on beautiful, beautiful Heroku. Doesn't have any security vulnerabilities at all. Sorry. Don't know if you heard the news just lately, but they have. Anyway, I don't have to go into the application, actually, because the problem is in the thing that I can do a curl request. So if I'm doing a curl request using this header, I have a lot of fun. What I do here is I'm using a content type. And who recognizes this content type? Come on. It's an invalid content type. And that's exactly the problem, because in this version of Apache Struts 2, using this invalid content type, you go into an exceptional flow. In that exceptional flow, you are allowed to utilize OGNL, the expression language within Apache Struts. Object Graph Navigational Language, I think. Anyway, with that expression language, I can interfere with objects that are there, so call certain methods on it, or I can do more fun, and I can, let me enlarge this so it is on one line. Where is it? Somewhere here. Creating a new process builder. Amazing. Give that process builder a bash and feed that bash an arbitrary command. That sounds like a lot of fun. So let's try this. Let's do this one, and I will explain to you in a second what I'm doing. So I'm using that header that I just showed you, and I do a substitution. The word command gets out, the word env gets in, and env is a Linux command to show me the environment variables. And let's not do it on localhost, no, let's do it on Heroku. Pray to the demo gods that this works, and that Wi-Fi is stable enough, or else I look like an idiot. Anyway, boom, works. You see, because I reroute the output writer to an input writer, I can now see the environment variables of my Heroku pod. And you say, yeah, environment variables, how interesting is that? Not. It's not really interesting. Well, it now shows me that the Java home is at /app/.jdk. Maybe I can use that. Anyway, but if I can call the environment variables, I might be able to call other things, create files, create scripts, come back 2 days later, execute that script. Good luck in your postmortem finding out what the heck happened. Right? Arbitrary code execution, something you don't want. And if I can do this, I can also connect maybe to a reverse shell and actually have, if it's root, have root access. Super interesting. But let's continue with this one. So I know the Java home. Cool. Let's go into that application. Let's sign up. Oh, name. Always do this wrong. Brian. Brian at sneak.io, which is not my email address. Password 123456 because I work at a security company. And sign up. It works. Yeah, no, I know I need to change my password, and I don't want to save it. Well, what I can do, I can create to-dos. And I can do something like, funny, like eat pie. Yeah, 1970 is good, and I'm hungry by now, so give it a high priority. If I create this, what we see is that pi sign is changed into the ASCII representation. What I can conclude from this, also if I look at the code, but it was funny to demo it, is that it uses the native to ASCII function, which is there available in your JDK. Already rings a bell? So what I can do as well, it changes that symbol into the ASCII representation. Hold that thought. I can also upload things. I can upload zip files. And it unzips and it puts the unzipped files in my public folder. But what if my zip file, oh yeah, remember the Java home? What if my zip file looks like this? This is my zip file. Has two files. One, good.txt, which is a good file. Nothing wrong with it. And then a second file with a file name // all the way to the root of the system, then goes to /app/.jdk, which is the location of my JDK in Heroku, /bin/native to ASCII. This sounds like fun. So I'm trying to override the native to ASCII function. So going here, choose the file. Why did I bury that one away so deep? Open that zip file, and upload it. And what we see is that in my folders that good.txt is there. So what happened? Hello devox. Put something in. Doesn't matter what the date is. Doesn't matter what priority I give it, because now everything is translated to muhahaha gotcha. Because the library I use to unzip my thing, and Java unzipping is a pain. Let's face it. There is no unzip function. I have to look into the byte stream, get the bytes out, create a new file, get that byte stream in, etc., etc. I have the tools, I have the Lego blocks, but don't have the full feature. So I'm using a library to do that. But this library didn't check for the canonical name. It just looked at, oh, file name, good, upload folder, good, just what we saw in my code. Connect the two together, execute. And it overrode the native to ASCII function because basically everything in Heroku is just in a container. I didn't specify a specific user, so it probably runs as root, and I can access the JDK. Mayhem. So I'm using the wrong version of a library. And I didn't test this, as in my normal unit test won't cover this. So we need to be careful. We need to take care of this. So thinking about your application, the code you wrote is probably something like this. The other stuff is imported. And important, but important. You inherit the security vulnerabilities as well. So who updates their libraries quite often?
What is often?
Yeah, that's exactly the second question. What is often? You should think about that. What is your strategy? When does a library comes in? When do we update it? And when do we remove it? Because everything that is available on the class path, if we talk about class path and not module path, on the class path can technically be loaded into memory. So can technically be a part of a chain of attacks. Think about it. An attack is never a direct hit. It's always a chain of events connected together, things you never thought of, and in the end, there is something that executes and blows your application up, or mines bitcoins. Whatever. It's never, or almost never, a direct hit. Well, almost never. We come to that. So, simple execution thing. We created a Spring Serverless application some time ago, 222 lines of serverless code, very bad, demo code, a lot of duplication. That's why I only show you a snippet, because it's horrible. Anyway, 5 direct dependencies. And we use Maven, so 5 direct dependencies go into 54 dependencies. My team is responsible for this code. How many lines of code am I responsible for? Hint, it's not 222. Just name a number, scream. How many lines of code is my binary?
Over 9,000.
I love that reference. Thank you. And it's over 9,000. You're completely right. It's 460,046 lines of code. And of course, not everything is reachable, but we don't know because there's a lot of things like serialization in place. There's a lot of reflection in place. So we don't actually know what's going to happen and if that path is actually executable or not. So we should be conservative and well aware of what is happening there. Because open source use has exploded, of course, and people are attacking it for obvious reasons. Because if you don't update, or not often enough, depending on what you think is often, and you just look at new features and not what is already in production, you might end up in the same space as Equifax did, and you don't want it. Just a shout out to the Equifax guys. After that incident, they probably have now the best security team in the world, I believe. They did a lot of reworking on that. So, well, new packages per ecosystem per year, that's a lot. NPM is the clear winner because, well, we can say a lot of things on that. Maybe quality, I don't know, assumptions. But during 2019, they reached that 1 million package, and I think they're already over 2 million packages. I don't know, it says something. So you might find a ton of packages that you do the same thing. Which one do you choose? And vulnerabilities identified per ecosystem. Unfortunately, in Maven Central, we're the clear winners. But still, most of the things are not the things that you directly import, but because you're importing a library, it imports a library, imports another library, like several layers deep, and somewhere in that Spring Boot starter that imports like 200 million packages, there is something that might be vulnerable. Where were you in exactly December 10th last year? I vividly remember that day. It was the first day of my vacation, and you already guessed, That was screwed. I was called in back. Who does it? Who hasn't heard of Log4j? Thank you, appreciate that. Well, I don't have to explain the problem. It was a huge problem, and that was a direct hit. As in, because of that package, and a lot of folks imported that as a transitive dependency. So you're not using it by yourself, but because you're using a framework that might have it in it and logs with it, you're vulnerable. Slight note, I think the pull request originated from 2013 or 2014, something like that creates this vulnerability. So it was in your application for years. That's fun. Well, let me briefly explain to you if you don't know what it is. Log4j, I have an application, and if I know that something is logged, like in an error log or something, and one of the things is, if I log in with the wrong username, you probably log that as an error, hopefully. That is a best practice, though. So I know that that is logged. Cool. What I can do, I can call this thing, and it goes to a JNDI request, and, well, the JNDI request calls an LDAP server, and I own that LDAP server. That LDAP server gives back, for instance, a reference to my application, and that reference says to download a file from an HTTP server that I also own. Well, then that file, depending on the Java version, will automatically be executed. That's the nutshell version of it. So, say my evil class looks like this. On my local machine, I can open a calculator. Woohoo, calculator. But I can also execute a string that does a reversed shell again, which is more interesting. So let me show you how that works. For instance, I have this application. Let's log out of this one, and let's say do something wrong. And we know that it logs over here. So what I can do, I have this application running over here. It says it has my LDAP and my HTTP server running. So I can do something like this. Oh, not to the Docker host. And I will load that application and give it a password, doesn't matter. But what happens now is my calculator starts up. That's a side effect, because that object factory, when it's instantiated, it executes the side effect. It can be a println, but it can also be a runtime execution. Not what we want. Well, however, we thought in first place that, and this is something I wrote, that if you're on newer Java versions, this thing like the trust URL code base, that parameter, on older builds of Java was set to true, which basically means whatever comes from there, it's good, I trust it. In newer builds, it was automatically set to false. However, and if it's set to false, this is not directly possible. However, I can reset that parameter, but also it is an engager for a deserialization chain attack. If you want to know more about that, I have a talk about deserialization exploits on Friday. I will get deeper into that, but I don't have the time now. And I will show you, if you have a deserialization chain, I can use log4j to initialize the deserialization chain and actually do the same thing and do a reverse shell or something like that and do all sorts of fun stuff. So if you are interested, let's look at that. Anyway, we asked people in our annual State of Open Source Security survey, like, how do you find out about vulnerabilities? 27% said, I probably won't, which is comforting, right? Or this is more important. Who is actually responsible for security? Who says the security team is responsible? Who says the operations team is responsible? You're wrong. We're all responsible, so they're included. But for the software, the thing that we create, we are responsible as well. And that makes sense because we make decisions based on the problems we want to solve, either in your own code or the package that you include. And we think about performance, and we think about, does it make sense or something like that. But also think about, is it secure enough? I mean, it's my decision. My security engineer has no clue. It just looks like, do you have the firewall installed or something like that? But I make the decisions, and we want to ship on a daily basis or, well, 3 times a day. So I need to be aware of what I'm putting in is already secure from the get-go. So we talked about code. We talked about your open source dependencies, which is basically the binary that you submit. But nowadays, your code base is not only that. Goes way deeper. So for instance, you need to supply the environment, like a container. And let's put it to Docker containers, for instance. What is the first thing you do in a Docker container? Or when you write a Docker file? What's the first line? From something Ubuntu or whatever. A base image. So you download something blindly from Docker Hub or whatever repository. You have no clue what's in it. Yes, this is the being scary kind of part. And you just base on top of that. Same as your dependencies, that's a liability, or at least you should be aware of what's in it. 2019, did this research. I downloaded the 10 most commonly used, free, available base images, or images that you can base your stuff upon. This was the result when I scanned them for vulnerabilities. And again, my favorite language is on top. Sorry, my second favorite language. I'm a Java developer. No, the point was, every of these packages had vulnerabilities. And if we looked at the node image, it wasn't node because I downloaded the latest image, what most people do. If you look at Stack Overflow, how to create a Docker image from node. Don't put a tag in it, because then automatically gets the latest, which is fine. But then I don't rebuild my application for 20 years. What could happen? The point was, the node latest image at that point, and still is built on top of a full Debian, at that point, Debian Jessie version. And all these vulnerabilities were traced back to the original operating system layer. And for most of that is the case. And then you think like, yeah, but these binaries that come into my application with my operating system, I don't use them. But are you sure there's absolutely no path available that I can leverage these things? And if you're not sure, we should take care of this. For instance, do I need a full Debian operating system for a tiny microservice, nano service, whatever service you're creating? Probably not. So you might want to look into smaller images just for a functional perspective, but also from a security perspective. Because what you don't use, you don't need. Don't put it in there. So yes, the best way is to create your image from scratch, but that's not really convenient. We asked people, when do you scan for Docker images for operating system vulnerabilities? And half of the people we asked, I said, we don't. Please move on. How do you find out if that's already deployed? And again, a lot of people don't. So let's hack a Docker container, just for giggles. Let me see. Let me go back to here. I have that same application as you saw before. I have it here. And as you can see, it's on my local host because it runs in a Docker container. It runs in this container. Please believe me for that. Cool. The problem is, this container, let me show you the Docker file so that actually makes sense. So I use a multi-stage build. I first built my application using Maven 3, JDK 8 Slim, la-di-la-di, copy a few things, and then for my final image I'm using Tomcat 8.5.21. I'm not sure if anybody uses Tomcat. This is a very, very old version, and for a particular reason, because it has a vulnerability. Let me get into the application. With this vulnerability, it was possible to upload the JSP file to the server via a specially crafted request. This JSP could then be requested, and any code it contained would be executed. Cool. Exploit database. You see, I'm a lazy hacker. And we already have something available. This is a Python script created for me that I can execute, and it does two things. It creates that specially crafted request, and the first step is it creates a JSP file with a system println with all A's, just to show if it's actually possible or not. The second step is the actual nice hack, useful hack, is creating a JSP file with a form, with a text box and a submit button. And every time I submit a single piece of text, I execute it. So I create myself a web shell. Let's try this. So these files do not exist yet. I have this Python script loaded. So let's do a check and see if it's it's vulnerable. So that means that this one, let me refresh it, should be there. Interesting. That means I can now start uploading my web shell. Right? This is not there? Cool. So let's do that. I'm just executing exactly that script that I showed you. Uploading web shell. All right. Boom. Nice. So, who knows what user I am? Because you've seen a Docker file. By default, Docker runs as root. So, I can do whatever I want. I have a web shell available because now I'm not touching your Java application. I'm just going for your Docker container because you didn't update. You used the latest version somewhere 10 years ago. Good for you. So you can imagine that if you're using Docker containers, you want to know if they are vulnerable, if they're vulnerable, if there's a vulnerability now, or in some sort of future, if it's found or not. Of course, we cannot look into the future, but if you're using that container without rebuilding it, you want to know in some point that there is a vulnerability, so you want to monitor it. If I would have scanned this application, and I scanned it with my CLI tooling, in this case, on my local machine before I have committed this, it already shows me that I'm using an old version. And if I just go to Tomcat 8 in this case, and Tomcat 8 would be the shortcut for, I think it's 75 or 76 to that, I would already get rid of a ton of vulnerabilities. Not 700 something, but 94. And if I would do that, trust me, I don't have the time for that, but trust me, then this vulnerability would it's vanished. So updating this and knowing this is super, super important. So, okay. We talked about code, open source, and containers. But nowadays, we all do everything in Kubernetes, or not. The point is, there's more and more stuff upon our shoulders. Infrastructure as code is part of our code. It's part of our repository. We might create YAML files for Kubernetes. We might use Terraform in some cases. And the most common mistake in there is misconfiguration. Things like giving a certain pod or node too much privileges, making sure that it's outward facing while it actually shouldn't be. And these cases, well, there's tooling available to scan and to help you out with that, or at least help you out to a certain extent that you are less vulnerable. I'm not saying that you're totally not vulnerable because this is a continuous process. And getting into there, what is the solution in this case? Well, the solution is basically 3 ways. Culture, process, and tooling. So let's get back to culture, the first one. Think about it. We work with different people. Developers, core operations folks, security guys, and we all have different mindsets and different KPIs. As a developer, core developer, I want to create stuff, I want to build stuff, I want to do it as soon as possible, preferably with the newest framework and the newest Java version or whatever. My focus is on building and creating features and solving problems. That does not always align with, for instance, what the folks from the security team want. Their single KPI is, and of course this is exaggerated, not getting breached. So it can work, but if you're still getting breached, well, we're not aligning. And that means we have to get back to the drawing board and do it all over again. Operations folks, they think about scalability and maintainability, like making sure that if I give it to them, can I easily start it up? And if it goes down in the middle of the night, is it automatically recovering? Well, we already think about that because we have DevOps, or we try to do DevOps. But that security mindset is something we need to get into. Think about it in the other way around. Who of you recognize the story? I have this manager that's breathing down my neck every single day to get that feature out today. And I say, that's not possible. Tomorrow morning. Okay. And we do that. And we're like, sure, we can do that. But every time we take a little shortcut and we create technical debt. In the end, we're not able to expand and put more features on it because we created a technical debt without reducing it. Because there's no time for that. That doesn't have a business case. What's the return on investment on that? Blah, 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 blah. Initially, there is a return on investment on that. But that's the same from us towards the security folks. If I'm just doing things, they're coming back to me and saying like, cowboy, nice, but fix it. I'm like, no. Because my KPI is getting stuff out. So that culture is important. If there is no culture, stop it, fix that first. If we're not aligned on that we need to do this, no tooling will ever help you. Then there's process. Please don't start new process like, hey, I've got this Excel sheet with 100 boxes, and you have to tick every box and test it manually before you can go to production. That works if you just got breached, and you're like, oh yeah, this is horrible. And then everybody's on that mindset, but 2 weeks from there, it's like back to normal, and everybody is pushing stuff. So that doesn't work. But look at how your process works now. Don't put in a tool just to satisfy the tool. Say, for instance, you don't have an automatic CI pipeline. I know that is weird, but say, old-fashioned, I do it on my local machine, and I deploy it from my local machine, because super safe. It doesn't make sense to put in a CI pipeline just for the sake of scanning, because the first thing what I would do as a developer is, how can I circumvent that, go around that, and make sure that all these boxes are ticked, or I'm going to production anyway. Because my manager is not watching me like 24/7. He still wants me to run these KPIs. So look at your current process and make sure that your tooling is adapted to the process that you have instead of the process that you need to be. Don't create new process. So if you are working in IntelliJ, well, we've got a plugin for that, but it doesn't make sense if you're not working on IntelliJ to force everybody on it. In the meantime, like, yeah, I have it here, and I still do it in my old-fashioned VI or with, I don't know, NetBeans, Eclipse, not judging. So, it makes sense to pick the tooling that fits your process. Make sure that you look into it in such a way that you can just seamlessly integrate it and preferably automate a ton of stuff that you don't want to do manually. Yes, we can help you sneak code, sneak marketing slides, but so we have tooling for all these things. Anyhow, it's not about the tooling. Yeah, well, it is kinda, but it's also how you do the scanning. It's not just, I have a tooling and it can scan for you. But it only works in the CI pipeline if you use Jenkins. Well, I'm not using Jenkins. Why not do it on every step? For instance, your code scanning, or the code on your local machine, that you can scan it already before it hits the GitHub repository or the Git repository. Why not connect your Git repository and scan it on a daily basis? So if something new comes up, because it lives there for a while, I get at least pinged as, hey, we found something new. Or it might already give me a pull request, and we found something, but there's a newer version, there's a pull request. Hopefully, well, all our test suites are perfectly fine, so we can maybe automatically merge it into there. That already helps me, pinpointing where the problem is. Your CI pipeline, you probably have a CI pipeline and you want to do it before you go to production. Makes sense. I'm not saying that you have to block it there or not, that's up to you. It's your context. It doesn't make sense to always block it if there is a vulnerability. Maybe not. Maybe you're like, oh, I'm okay with this amount of vulnerabilities because they don't impact me that much. But the point is, if you are in production, you still need to take care of that. You need to monitor that. For instance, with my tooling, if I do a sneak monitor, what we see, for instance, is that the dependency tree is something static. The Docker container, the base image, is static. So we can scan that on and on, like every day. And if a new vulnerability like that log4j thing pops up, it chimes in on me like, hey, you're asking me to scan this, but we found something. Now it's up to you how to fix it. We give you these solutions, but again, it's up to you. You might want to automate that or need, but not like CI pipeline, it was good. Let's get back to the new feature. Because what's good today is probably not good tomorrow or a week from now or a year from now. The thing is, a lot of folks in the security space say, you need to shift left. It's an awful term. Shift left means shift left in this, that you had to start on the local machine of the developer. Yes, initially you have to start there. But we're not doing waterfall anymore. Come on, folks. It is a continuous process. So there is no left in a continuous loop. What we need to do is make sure that we do it at every step of the way. And if you use my tooling, I'm absolutely, that's great. If you use somebody else's tooling, I'm also fine. We need to take care of this. As developers, we need to take this upon us and make sure that in our development lifecycle, on a local machine, our Git repository, or wherever we want to do this, we at least make it visible that if there is a security vulnerability or a security vulnerability comes up, that we know of it and we can make the right decisions. I'm not saying you need to do this or you need to do that, but be well informed. And we know it's more than just your own code. It's more than just your code or the binary that you put into production. It's also your Docker containers. It's also your infrastructure as code, because nowadays that's all part of our code base. If you want to know more about that log4j stuff, this afternoon we have a mini lab going into that, creating your own exploit. And have a little fun with that, hopefully. So join us at the Coding Cafe. If you want to know more about that, deserialization, I already showed you that on Friday I have a, sort of more deeper dive into Java serialization and how things can go horribly wrong. And of course, log4j comes in there as well, but that's just a tiny, tiny part. For now, I want to leave you with that thank you for being here in the early morning, almost it's afternoon now, but still morning, listening to a security talk, and I appreciate you all. Thank you. I have 5 minutes. If you have questions now, please do. If you like, let me digest this for a second. We have a booth, and I am there almost the rest of the day. Feel free to come up, ask us questions. Maybe we can help you with a certain use case, maybe not. But I have smart people over there that know more than me. One question. Yes, sir.
I don't know about your tool specifically, but does it need updating in itself to detect the latest vulnerabilities, or does it really just read? Because obviously that's an added overhead. If your security tool that's scanning needs updating in itself, that's something else.
So let me paraphrase that. Your question is if my tooling needs updating as well, because that's again overhead. Our initial tooling is a platform tool, so a SaaS tool, or so it's internet-based, cloud-based. So we update it for you. Yes, we can also do an on-prem version, but this is the sales pitch part. So move away if you want to. We can also do on-prem, and then it needs updating. So it depends on what your solution is. But we get multiple solutions for multiple kind of enterprises that have different needs. But for instance, you can use it for free. There is a free tier with an amount of scans. Please feel free to do it. You don't need to update the tooling. It updates under the hood, unless you use the CLI. The CLI has new capabilities, I think, every single day, and that one you need to update. But again, the scanning itself, no, that's server-side. Yes, sir?
Always interested. What do you use to test the security of your SaaS product?
The question is what we as the company use to test our own stuff. Am I right? Our own stuff. We dog food ourselves. And that means we dog food ourselves and we use the right tooling, but we also have a ton of security researching teams that contribute to that and contribute to the CVE database. So it's more or less like, hey, we found out that this issue is reported, but we cannot find it yet. Why is that? Before it becomes public.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So yes, we use our own tooling. And we have more than just the CVE database. We have our own intelligence as well. That makes it more interesting and sometimes also more challenging. If there are no further questions, again, thank you. Feel free to come by anytime. And we have a competition to win some nice prizes. Basically, scanning a public GitHub repository that you have. Initially, we count the amount of vulnerabilities, and every vulnerability you fix, so you need to be able to commit to that GitHub repository. You get points for that. You don't need to use our tooling. We just look at the differences. Little tip: look into the Sneak GitHub repository, and look for something like demo, workshop, or something like that. Fork that one. Scan it, it has a ton of vulnerabilities, and then there's probably a step-by-step guide how to fix them. And you get on top of the board and you get win prizes. Just saying. Don't tell anybody. Oh, it's taped. Anyway, thank you, folks. See you later. Enjoy the rest.